Have you done work on personality? Like, because I know that there are some women who are really good at that and that's what they do. And I feel like some people are less interested in that. Is that from personality differences?
Yeah,
What
I'm
is
a big
that?
fan of the Big Five personality trait system, and I've often used it in my research. It's a great thing to measure. When in doubt, if you're running a psych study, try to get some measure of general cognitive ability or intelligence if you can, and try to measure the Big Five because they're almost always predictive. In this particular case, female versus female competition, it'll probably be a combination of low agreeableness, which is kind of associated with, you know, assertiveness and a little Machiavellianism and manipulativeness. There'll be a little bit of extroversion mixed in terms of being socially assertive enough to try to manipulate other people rather than just kind of withdrawn and introverted. Um, and I think it also takes maybe a relatively high degree of emotional stability or low neuroticism to do these tactics, right? Because they're risky and they can backfire. So if a woman's very neurotic, worried, anxious, depressed, she's not as likely, I think, to use these kinds of tactics. But that's pretty speculative.
You
It's
just,
pretty speculative, but that's where I'd put a bet.
okay. I hope it's speculative. You've just described exactly my personality. Almost, actually, not entirely. No, the agreeableness. My. Have you ever split it up into like
Yeah,
subdomains?
the
So
facets.
agreeableness splits into yeah, the facets. Sorry, I scored almost zero in politeness, but
Yeah.
compassion was like 89. So I guess that doesn't make me like unreasonably disagreeable, on average.
Yeah, I think so the facet level traits are really important because a lot of people have kind of vaguely heard of the Big Five, like from you or from Jordan Peterson or whoever, but each of them has these subcomponents, right? Just like intelligence has components like spatial intelligence, verbal intelligence, social intelligence. Any given Big Five trait, like agreeableness, will have these little components like compassion, politeness. I'm kind of like you, like online on Twitter, I'm not super polite. In person, I'm highly polite. And I like to think I'm pretty compassionate in terms of like actually caring about people and animals and so forth.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, very cool. Well, I guess we might as well talk about what effective altruism is.
This is a movement launched about 10 or 12 years ago by a couple of Oxford moral philosophers, Will McGaskill and Toby Ord. And it's grown into this kind of global movement of tens of thousands of people, mostly young people, mostly highly compassionate, maybe a little bit Aspergery on average, like um, highly rational, highly systematizing people. And the concept is try to do the most good that you can in the world, but using reason and evidence and open-minded kind of rational debate rather than just virtue signaling or rather than just going with your gut feeling or your empathy, right? So what the effective altruists tend to talk about a lot is, look, if you're going to give to charity, try to find charities that actually have good empirical evidence that what they're spending money on actually does some good, actually works. So they like recommending charities that have actually run like randomized clinical trials for their interventions. So for example, one thing that really seems to help to reduce global poverty is a thing called direct cash transfers. So there's an organization called Give Directly where you can donate money to them and they'll simply like wire the money to poor people who could use it and who have the wisdom to spend it on whatever they think they need instead of us telling them what we think they need. And randomized controlled trials show that's actually very effective at reducing poverty and improving lives. So the basic idea is you try to have kind of a scientific mindset rather than just a virtue signaling mindset when you're doing beneficence, when you're trying to do good in the world. And I've taught several courses on the psychology of effective altruism and some of the ways that our kind of intuitive moral psychology fits with that viewpoint, but also really struggles with it. Because I think a lot of our moral intuitions basically come from hundreds of thousands of years of virtue signaling, right? To get credibility at an ethical level within our little clan or tribe. And we're not very well adapted to thinking about large-scale problems that like affect 8 billion people in the world, or that affect maybe billions or trillions of animals. So EA is basically an attempt to like fill the gap between our evolved moral intuitions versus what actually works in the modern world. I hope that makes some sense.
That definitely makes sense.
It's a pretty weird movement, but I think it's exciting.
Well, it sounds like intelligent people trying to do good.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. So you said we've all evolved through virtue signaling and kind of smaller groups of people and tribes. Do you think that goes for kind of everybody back then across the board? Because I always assumed virtue signaling was, well, basically lying.
Yeah. I have more of a kind of neutral take. Like I published this little book called Virtue Signaling in 2019. And I tried to emphasize like virtue signaling as a term became very common around 2016 with the Trump versus Clinton election. And it was often used by conservatives to make fun of leftist people preaching at everybody, but not actually doing very much good, right? So there's a negative kind of cheap talk version of virtue signaling where you're just running around on social media saying, you guys should do this, don't do that, you're good, you're bad, blah, blah, blah. My view is virtue signaling can be extremely positive. For example, if you got two single people and they're searching for mates and they meet up and they have a date, they're trying to evaluate each other's kind of ethical compass and their personality traits, like how agreeable, how compassionate is this person? And they'll talk about all kinds of things that basically boil down to virtue signals. But some of those might actually be reliable indicators, right? So if they say, look, I volunteer in a soup kitchen 6 hours a week, it's hard to do that if you're a psychopath, right? Somebody with no empathy couldn't stand to do that week after week. So it is actually some kind of good signal of underlying values and personality traits. I just wish that more people were selective about what they actually do and maybe do things that deliver real benefits to others rather than just working as really good signals of who you are.